The coffee was still burning on my face when he smirked at me across the table. Not a flinch, not an apology. Just that slow, practiced smile of a man who has never once faced a consequence in his entire life. He adjusted his cufflinks, actual gold cufflinks, the kind that cost more than my first car, and leaned back in his chair like he was the one who owned the room. Like I was supposed to wipe my face, look down, and go quiet. He thought he knew exactly what kind of man I was. He was wrong. My name is Conrad Mercer. I'm 46 years old. I'm a senior risk and compliance officer for a regional financial institution here in Boston, Massachusetts. I spend my days reading fine print that other people ignore, finding the cracks in systems that look solid from the outside, and understanding what people are really doing when they think nobody's watching. I have spent 2 decades learning how to wait, and sitting in that conference room at the Marriott Copley Place with hot coffee dripping down the side of my face, I did not reach for a napkin. I did not raise my voice. I did not do a single thing that Dalton Reeve expected me to do. I just looked at my wife, Simone, and I watched something shift in her eyes. What happened next? What happened to Dalton in the 24 hours that followed? Is something I am still turning over in my mind 6 months later. Not because I feel sorry for him, but because I want you to understand something about patience, about the difference between the men who control rooms with money and the men who control rooms with knowledge, and about why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below, telling me, have you ever been disrespected by someone who thought your silence meant weakness? Because this one is going to hit different. Let me take you back to where this actually started, because the coffee was not the beginning. The coffee was just the moment Dalton finally showed everyone in that room who he actually was. Simone and I met 4 years ago at a conference downtown. She was presenting research on community lending programs. I was on a panel about compliance risk in small institutions. We talked for 3 hours over bad conference coffee and mediocre sandwiches. And by the end of the evening, I already knew she was the most honest person I'd spoken to in years. She had been divorced from Dalton Reeve for 2 years at that point. They had 1 son together, her son Theo, who was 8 when we met and is now 12. Smart kid, quiet kid. The kind of boy who notices everything and says very little, which meant he and I got along immediately. Simone had never hidden the facts of her first marriage. Dalton was a senior investment banker at a firm with offices on State Street, the kind of address that made certain people in Boston look at you differently. He came from old Connecticut money, prep school, Dartmouth, the whole architecture of inherited confidence. He had treated her well enough in the beginning, she said, but there is a particular kind of man who loves a woman most when she is grateful for the attention, and Dalton was exactly that kind of man. The moment Simone started building her own reputation, her own career, her own voice in rooms where his name used to open every door, that's when the marriage started cracking. He couldn't handle it. Men like Dalton never can. The divorce had been clean enough on paper. Joint custody of Theo, generous settlement, no public ugliness. But underneath the paper there was always this current of contempt, this quiet insistence that Simone had come down in the world by leaving him, that she had traded something valuable for something lesser. That lesser thing, in Dalton's understanding, was me. He never said it directly. Men like him rarely do. Instead, there were small moments. The way he looked me up and down at the first custody pickup I attended with Simone. That slow assessment, like I was a vehicle he was considering whether to buy, and had already decided against. The comments that weren't quite insults but weren't quite anything else either. Conrad's in compliance, is that right? Important work. Keeping the little banks from stepping out of line. Said with a smile that meant nothing. Simone always told me to let it go. He wants you to react, she'd say. The day you react is the day he wins. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing someone is trying to bait you and actually sitting still while they do it are 2 very different disciplines. For 2 years, I sat still. I showed up at custody exchanges with my face neutral and my hands in my pockets. I sat through 2 school events where Dalton positioned himself across the auditorium and made sure to catch my eye each time someone asked Theo about his father. I attended 1 Thanksgiving dinner at Simone's mother's house where Dalton materialized uninvited, supposedly to drop off a gift for Theo, and stayed for 45 minutes talking about a deal he'd just closed while I sat at the kitchen table helping Simone's mother peel sweet potatoes. Every single time, I let it pass. Every single time, Dalton walked away thinking he had won something. And then came the custody review meeting. Theo had started struggling in school, nothing dramatic. A few missed assignments, some withdrawal from his friends, a teacher who sent a concerned email about his focus in class. Simone and I had talked about it at length. We thought it might be related to the schedule, the constant back and forth between two households, the low-level stress of being a 12-year-old kid navigating two very different worlds. She proposed a family meeting, a structured conversation between both sets of parents, Simone and me, Dalton and his new girlfriend, a woman named Priscilla who worked in wealth management and had a way of entering rooms like she was already bored by them. A mediator, neutral ground, an adult conversation about what Theo actually needed. Dalton agreed. That surprised me. I should have paid more attention to the fact that it surprised me. We met on a Tuesday morning in January at the Marriott Copley Place, a conference room Simone had booked through her firm. Professional space. Neutral. The kind of room where people are supposed to behave like adults because there are no walls between them and their worst instincts, just glass and the ambient pressure of public expectation. The mediator was a woman named Dr. Karen Ashby, family therapist, calm voice, the kind of face that had heard everything and was still not surprised by any of it. She had arranged the seating carefully, Simone and I on one side, Dalton and Priscilla on the other, Dr. Ashby at the head. Coffee and water were already on the table when we arrived. It was, I remember thinking, a completely reasonable setup for a completely reasonable conversation. For about 20 minutes it was. We talked about Theo's schedule. We talked about consistency between households. Dr. Ashby asked thoughtful questions. Everyone answered them carefully, and the whole thing felt like exactly what it was supposed to be. Two sets of adults doing the uncomfortable work of putting a child's needs first. And then Dalton shifted in his chair, and something changed in his posture. I had learned to read that shift over 2 years. It meant the performance of reasonableness was over. He started talking about stability, about what Theo needed in a primary home environment, about the importance of having a male role model who understood ambition, who could model success for a boy at a formative age. He was not looking at Dr. Ashby when he said this. He was looking at me. Theo needs to see what it looks like when a man builds something, he said. Not just monitors what other people built. Simone's hand tensed on the table beside mine. I felt it. I did not respond. Dr. Ashby redirected smoothly. She was good at her job, and the conversation moved for a few minutes. But Dalton wasn't finished. He kept angling back. He talked about the neighborhood we lived in, a perfectly good neighborhood in Somerville, in a way that suggested it wasn't quite adequate for a boy of Theo's background. He talked about private school options he was considering, as if Simone and I hadn't already been part of every educational conversation for 2 years. He talked about Theo's potential in a tone that made it clear he thought the boy's potential was being quietly capped by the company he kept at home. Every time Dr. Ashby tried to bring things back to the actual subject of the meeting, Dalton found a way to steer them back to me. I sat there and I let it happen because I knew, at some point, he was going to go too far. That was the pattern, with men like Dalton. They mistake stillness for absence. They read patience as blankness. They push and push and push because nobody has ever made them pay for it, and they have come to believe they never will. I was waiting to see exactly how far he was willing to go. I found out when he picked up his coffee. I still don't know if it was fully intentional. That's the truth, and I'll give him that much uncertainty. What I know is this. I had just quietly disagreed with something he said about Theo's academic support. Something specific, something that contradicted what he'd just claimed. And the disagreement landed cleanly enough that even Priscilla's eyes moved to the table. Dalton didn't like that. He reached for his coffee cup. His arm swung wide as he set it down. Too wide, with too much force, and the cup tipped and the coffee came across the table and hit me directly on the left side of my face and neck. Hot. Not scalding, but hot enough to matter. The room went completely silent. Dalton said, "Oh," in a voice that didn't sound particularly sorry. He pulled a napkin from the center of the table and held it out to me across the glass, and the expression on his face was not apology. It was something closer to satisfaction, wrapped in the thinnest skin of plausible deniability. "These things happen," he said, and then he smiled. Not a big smile, just the corner of his mouth, just enough for me to see it and know what it meant. A private message sent across 6 feet of conference table. I can do whatever I want to you, and you cannot do a single thing about it. Dr. Ashby was already speaking, something calm and measured about taking a moment, about making sure everyone was physically okay. Priscilla was very interested in her water glass. And Simone, my wife, the woman I had watched be careful with this man for 2 full years because she was trying to protect our peace, protect her son, protect the fragile architecture of a co-parenting arrangement that mostly worked. Simone put her hand over mine on the table. She looked at Dalton for a long, quiet moment, and then she turned to me and said, in a voice that was steady in a way I will never forget, "Don't worry. This is exactly what it's worth." I looked at her. She wasn't telling me to back down. She wasn't telling me to be the bigger person or absorb it and move on. She was telling me something specific, something with a meaning that only made sense if you understood what she actually knew. I squeezed her hand once. I took the napkin from Dr. Ashby, not from Dalton, and I wiped my face calmly. I did not raise my voice. I did not say a single word to Dalton Reeve. I turned back to the mediator and said, "I think we were talking about Theo's Tuesday schedule." Dalton stared at me. I think he expected something. Anger, embarrassment, the kind of wounded silence that would confirm his read of me as someone who could be dismissed. What he got was a man continuing a conversation about his stepson's school calendar. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Nothing resolved. Nothing particularly advanced. Dalton and Priscilla left first. She didn't look at either of us on the way out. I sat in that conference room with Simone and Dr. Ashby for a few minutes after they were gone. Dr. Ashby said something professional about next steps. I don't remember exactly what. What I remember is that Simone's phone was face down on the table, and she hadn't picked it up. That was unusual. Simone always had her phone. We were in the elevator down to the lobby when it happened. Dalton was already there. He and Priscilla must have gotten turned around on the conference floor because they were waiting when the elevator opened, and for one strange, suspended moment, all 4 of us were in the same metal box moving down through the Copley Place Marriott, in complete silence. Dalton's phone rang. He answered it with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to being called about important things. "Reeve," he said, his voice shifting back into the register of power and consequence that was his natural habitat. I watched his face. The change was not dramatic. That's the thing I want you to understand. It wasn't a movie moment where a man's legs buckle and he grabs the wall. It was quieter than that. It was a stillness that spread from his eyes outward, the way ice forms across the surface of still water. His jaw tightened. His breathing changed. Priscilla noticed and looked at him, and he turned slightly away from all 3 of us. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. He stepped out, already speaking in a lower voice, one hand coming up to his forehead in that gesture men make when they're receiving information they are not ready to receive. Simone took my arm as we walked across the lobby toward the revolving doors. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. We were halfway to the parking garage when her phone finally came out of her pocket. She looked at the screen and made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. She handed it to me. There was an email. From a compliance monitoring service she subscribed to as part of her professional work. A regulatory filing alert. Automatic. The kind of thing that populated her inbox a dozen times a week. This one was about Dalton's firm. Specifically, it was about an internal investigation that had apparently concluded that morning, one that had been running quietly for 7 months, triggered by an anonymous complaint about a series of transactions that didn't hold up to scrutiny. The filing indicated that 2 senior bankers had been placed on administrative leave pending further regulatory review. The names were not public in the filing, but the firm's name was. And below the email in the message thread was a text from a woman I didn't recognize. A name I would learn later was connected to someone deep inside Dalton's firm, a contact Simone had carefully cultivated over 2 years of professional patience. The text said 4 words. It was him. Confirmed. I stood in the parking garage of the Copley Place Marriott, and I held my wife's phone and I thought about the way she'd said, "Don't worry, this is what it's worth." She hadn't been telling me to be calm. She had been telling me she already knew what was coming. Here is what I learned over the following 48 hours, piecing it together through public filings, through things Simone told me carefully and in the right order, and through one phone call from Dalton's lawyer that Simone declined to answer and forwarded immediately to our own attorney. The investigation was real. The anonymous complaint had been filed 7 months earlier, and the complaint was detailed. Specific trades, specific timestamps, specific communications that raised serious questions about whether Dalton Reeve had been using information he shouldn't have had access to in the way he'd been using it. I am a senior risk and compliance officer. I spend my days reading exactly these kinds of patterns. I know what it looks like when someone has been doing something carefully for a long time and then gets comfortable, gets arrogant, starts making moves that are slightly larger than they should be, slightly more confident than the underlying situation warrants. I don't know who filed that complaint. I have never asked Simone directly, and she has never told me directly, and I have learned that there are some questions in a marriage that don't need to be spoken to be understood. What I know is this. For 2 years, while Dalton was treating our home like a lesser version of his world, while he was showing up at school events with that practiced smirk and making comments about compliance work as if keeping financial institutions honest was something to be faintly embarrassed about. For 2 years, my wife had been building something quiet and careful and completely outside his ability to see it coming. Because men like Dalton never look carefully at the people they've already dismissed. He looked at me across a conference table and saw a man he could throw coffee at. He did not see the compliance officer sitting next to the woman who understood exactly how his world worked and had been paying very close attention. He was terminated from his position 4 days after the meeting. The firm released a statement about restructuring at the senior leadership level that fooled approximately nobody in the Boston financial community. The regulatory referral that followed, which is a matter of public record and not something I'm speculating about, made the picture considerably clearer. Priscilla, I heard through Simone's professional circle, had left the city. I don't know where she went, and I find I don't particularly care. What I care about is this. The following Tuesday, Simone and I sat at our kitchen table in Somerville with Theo, who was eating cereal and reading something on his tablet, unbothered by the fact that his parents were having a quiet conversation about the week ahead. The custody schedule, his upcoming project for school, whether he wanted to sign up for the coding camp at MIT's community program or the robotics one. He voted for robotics. I told him that was a good call. He looked up from his tablet and gave me the kind of look 12-year-olds give adults when adults say something obvious, and then he went back to what he was reading. That moment, that ordinary, unremarkable, genuinely peaceful moment, is the thing I keep coming back to. Not the coffee, not Dalton's face when his phone rang, not the email on Simone's screen. Just Theo, in our kitchen, deciding what kind of thing he wanted to learn next. I've thought a lot about what the lesson is in all of this, because I'm not someone who believes things just happen and we extract nothing from them. I spend my professional life looking for the pattern underneath the pattern, the mechanism behind the outcome. Here is what I think I actually learned. Dalton Reeve threw coffee at me because he had spent 2 years learning that I didn't react. He mistook my patience for emptiness. He thought my quiet was the quiet of a man who had nothing to say, nothing to stand on, no ground of his own. He never considered that there is another kind of quiet. The kind that comes from a man who knows exactly where he stands and is not interested in proving it to someone who has already decided not to see it. The kind that comes from a woman who has been paying careful attention for 2 years to a system she understands better than the man operating inside it. The people who hurt us most are almost never destroyed by our anger. Our anger gives them exactly what they want. Proof that they matter enough to move us. Evidence that they have power over our interior world. The performance of our wound is their reward. What undoes them, when anything does, is usually something much quieter. An email, a filing. A compliance system doing exactly what compliance systems are designed to do. A wife who understood, before I did, that justice rarely arrives through confrontation. It arrives through patience and knowledge and the willingness to let a man believe he has won until the moment the accounting comes due. The coffee burned on my face for about 20 minutes. Dalton Reeve will be dealing with his particular accounting for considerably longer. I wiped my face. I went home. I helped my stepson with his school project. And I have not thought about Dalton Reeve once since then with anything other than the mild, fading interest one might have in a weather event that has already moved through. He thought he was the storm. He was not the storm. My name is Conrad Mercer. I'm 46 years old. I'm a senior risk and compliance officer in Boston, Massachusetts. I have spent my career understanding one fundamental truth. The most dangerous thing in any room is not the loudest person. It's the person who already knows what's in the paperwork. My wife knew what was in the paperwork. And on a Tuesday morning in January, when a man threw coffee at my face and smiled because he thought he was untouchable, she put her hand over mine and said, "Don't worry." She was right. She was always right.